They said my fiancé died a hero, then his smartwatch came back online. They said my fiancé died a hero, but heroes don't disappear into redacted files. The letter came in a crisp white envelope with a government seal, signed in a blue flourish by a man I had never met, killed in an operational accident during classified fieldwork. One paragraph. No latitude, no city, no body. Just a folded flag and a promise that his sacrifice would not be forgotten, which felt like language engineered to slip neatly into a press release and then out of human memory. The night before he left, Ethan pulled my hands to his chest and held them there like I was a fragile machine with a failing battery he could steady back to life. If anything happens, he murmured into my hair. Don't believe what they tell you. About what? I asked. He smiled, soft and tilted, the way he did when he was thinking 3 moves ahead and choosing only one word to play. Anything. That was 6 months ago. Yesterday, his smartwatch came back online. It was almost comic in its mundanity. A polite ping on my phone at 2:14 a.m., a push notification I'd seen 100 times when he'd forget to charge it, and then revive it on the way to the gym. Ethan's Garmin device synced. The dots beneath it pulsed like a heartbeat. For a second I thought it was a delayed artifact, some server burp exhaling old telemetry. But then the heart rate graph populated, fresh, steady readings, a jogger's cadence tapering to rest. Alive data, not a ghost. I sat up in bed, the room tilting with me. No, I said out loud to no one. My throat felt like I'd swallowed a cough I couldn't unclench. When the second ping chimed, new activity detected, I pressed my thumb so hard into the glass that I left a whirl. The apartment around me was a museum of halted momentum, the suit jacket he'd left draped over a chair, the dark blue mug with a shallow, permanent coffee stain at the bottom, the titanium ring he'd made me from a retired drone's bearing. Even machines deserve second chances, he'd said, now threaded on a chain over our framed engagement photo. I had kept everything because grief, I'd learned, is both a fire and a freezer. You think it will burn you to ash, but mostly it suspends you, ice-locked inside. Yesterday, I opened the Garmin app. Location, unavailable. Battery, 87%. Last sync, 2:14 a.m. The graph showed a plateau around 120 BPM, then a gentle glide to 58. The number I knew as well as his shoe size. In the narrow silence after the AC kicked off, I could hear my own pulse a little too loud. It sounded like a foot tapping under a table where everyone else had stopped talking. The phone buzzed again, this time, a text from an unknown masked number. Just one line. He tried to tell the truth. They couldn't allow that. I dialed back. One ring, then dead air. A prickle crawled across my scalp, the animal part of me aware that something bigger than me had already entered the room. Ethan called himself a systems analyst, which is government speak for don't ask. We met at a cybersecurity summit in DC, where I was consulting on encryption models for a civilian contractor, and he was on loan from the Defense Intelligence Directorate, a branch so quiet that even its name seemed to slur and change depending on who said it. He laughed at one of my slides about entropy and took me for coffee to explain why randomness makes us safe until it doesn't. He had that methodical charm of people who hold secrets for a living, patient, observant, as if he was always waiting for the world to finish its sentence. He listened like a safe listens, no leaks, only clicks. On our third date, he admitted he preferred hand tools to apps. I like hearing a thing argue with the force I'm using, he said, rolling a hex key between his fingers. Software hides the argument. 3 years later, he proposed with that titanium ring he'd milled in a friend's garage on a lathe older than both of us. The band had a faint spiral, a machine's fingerprint. I said yes and cried into his shoulder until my face smelled like his soap. The next morning, he adjusted the ring by a fraction of a millimeter because he couldn't help himself. Tolerance, he said, grinning. Love is a tolerance problem. I work with patterns too, just in text. As a technical writer turned investigations researcher, I tile facts into mosaics for attorneys. Timelines, gaps, the hard grit of what can be documented. The day the letter arrived, I laid its phrases on my kitchen island like a crime scene. Operational accident, classified fieldwork, sacrifice not forgotten, and felt how smooth they were, worn by 1,000 identical hands. There was nowhere to grip. The funeral had no casket, a photograph on an easel, a folded flag on a table, and a room of crisp uniforms, many with eyes that skimmed past mine like I was the part of the report they'd already read. His mother held my fingers so tightly that my knuckles clicked. His father spoke in a voice so even I thought of a metronome. Afterward, a man with a polished skull and the particular posture of people who have always had clearance squeezed my shoulder and said, "He died serving his country, Ms. Park. That should bring you comfort." "I prefer a body," I said before I could subtract the sting from my tone. The man's mouth twitched. He did not let go of my shoulder. For months my life shrank to ritual. Wake, shower, stare at a wall until the shower turned off its own heat, answer emails, decline pity, visit his mother on Sundays, put the titanium ring on before bed and fall asleep with the chain imprinting a circle on my collarbone. When the government sent a second letter offering expedited survivor benefits if I signed an acknowledgement that I would not seek further details, I folded it back into the envelope and put it in the freezer behind a box of peas. Because I am my mother's daughter and some superstitions feel like engineering. Cold slows rot. Once, when I was 12, my father had taken me to the garage and unscrewed a radio so we could look at its guts. "Everything noisy is quiet inside," he'd said, pinching my chin when I leaned too close. He'd show me the coil and the board and the solder that looked like little frozen teardrops. Noise is what a story sounds like when you don't know which part is talking. He died the year I moved to DC. A blood clot on a morning with clear sky. Grief returned with Ethan's letter and brought my father's voice with it. To hear the truth, find the part that argues back. I didn't hear argument in the condolence letter. I heard script. So when the watch pinged, I recognized the sound a lie makes right before it cracks. Not a shout, but an undertone, a hum of misfit. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the banker's box I hadn't been able to open, the one with his laptop, notebooks, and the white envelope whose seal I had resealed 3 times by running a warm mug over it. I set the box on the floor and sat cross-legged like a kid. The lid popped with that small wet sigh cardboard makes when it finally lets go. His laptop looked like an accusation. The case was scratched where his ring had tapped when he thought. He'd told me once, half joke, half precaution, passwords are like prayers. It's pointless if the only person who knows them is dead. I typed our song 2019. The year of a concert I dragged him to despite his dislike of crowds. The year I watched him cry when the singer dropped her voice to a whisper and sang a line about learning to live with unfinished truths. The screen blinked. The desktop bloomed. It was too clean. Ethan wasn't messy, but he was exuberant in his curiosity. He left traces when something made him think. A folder on oscillator design, a PDF about flood maps, a picture of a bird he couldn't identify. This desktop looked as if it had been wiped and then recluttered with intention. A few spreadsheets, a calendar, a folder called receipts that held exactly 3 benign PDFs. I opened the system logs. The machine had been powered on twice since I sealed it, once by me the week after the funeral, when I'd failed to get past the login and cried in a terrible, hiccuping way on the floor, and once 2 months ago for 12 minutes while I was at his mother's house. I live alone. I keep my door locked. The hair lifted on my arms. I scanned for hidden directories the way you learn to search for false bottoms in a drawer. 3 minutes later I found it, a nested folder with a permissions flag set to trip me if I breathed wrong. It was named like a joke he'd make in bed, half asleep and tender / project signal /. The encryption was military grade, triple layered, salted like a winter road. It took me until sunrise, 4 cups of coffee, and a panic attack to slide it open. Inside, fragments, redacted memos scanned at an angle, photos of exterior doors and empty corridors, a 12-minute audio file labeled die 137_eth. My hand hovered over the trackpad, then clicked. Ethan's voice filled the room. Calm, low, professional in that particular way he was when he had decided to tell the truth to a wall, and hoped the wall one day sprouted ears. If this reaches anyone, it means I didn't make it out. The operation was never about cyber intrusion. It was about data erasure. They're deleting people, not files. Whistleblowers, operatives, civilians. Their digital footprints, bank trails, travel manifests scrubbed. Then they're officially deceased. It's a kill list rewritten as a cleanup protocol. I paused and rewound, certain I'd misheard, as if grief had retuned English into a language where words carried more weight than they could hold. Deleting people. He said it again, with the resigned clarity of someone who has measured a thing and found the number to be the number. He mentioned a program name, Helios. Helios means sun. My stomach lurched because that was exactly how this felt. Too bright to look at directly, too necessary not to. I searched procurement databases and congressional PDFs for 6 hours until my eyes felt lined with grit. Nothing. Then I found it in an archived budget request with most of the nouns blacked out, and a single phrase left bare as if by accident: Helios contingency architecture, under a division labeled behavioral neutralization, which is nothing, which is everything, which is the kind of phrase that cleans its own fingerprints. That's when the black SUV parked across the street. Not illegally, not even conspicuously. It idled long enough to condense its breath on a mild day. The two men who stepped out wore the kind of suits that say we train for both weather and courtrooms. They walked to my building's door without looking up, which is a way of looking at everything. I closed the laptop. I placed it back in the box. I went to the mirror and practiced looking like a woman for whom grief had burned away suspicion. When the knock came, it was gentle like a neighbor. I opened the door. "Miss Park?" the taller one asked. His badge flashed a seal and a name with too many consonants to remember. No agency acronym. The shorter man kept his hands visible, relaxed, like a portrait of harmlessness. "We're following up on some internal administrative questions pertaining to your fiancé's file." "Administrative?" I repeated, as if tasting a new spice. The taller one smiled the way people smile at children who have said something both annoying and correct. "Have you accessed any of Mr. Hale's devices or accounts since his passing?" I arranged my face into a shape I recognized from every condolence visit. "I tried to open his laptop the week after the funeral," I said, letting my voice thin and wobble, "but I couldn't get in." "Understandable," the shorter man said. "May we come in?" "No," I thought. Yes, I heard myself say, because fear is a ventriloquist that uses your own mouth. I stood aside. They stepped over our threshold and brought a kind of stillness with them, like the pause a hawk imposes on a field when it glides in and every mouse understands the sky differently. They were polite. They asked if Ethan had ever mentioned a project named after a Greek god. I said he didn't talk about work. They nodded in perfect unison. When I asked for their credentials again, the taller man said, "You don't need to verify what protects you, ma'am." After they left, I found the first listening device behind the bookshelf, its adhesive fresh enough to shine. The second sat in the smoke alarm, red light winking like an amused eye. I stared at the banked blue of the laptop sleep light and thought, in my father's voice, "Find the part that argues back." The watch had synced. The file existed. The men had come. Noise had organized itself into music. And somewhere inside that music, a disagreeable truth was demanding to be heard. The morning after the men left, the world looked like it had been redacted. Light felt artificial, sounds too curated, and every corner of my apartment hummed with the faint electricity of intrusion. I brewed coffee and poured it down the sink untouched. Then I took Ethan's laptop, wrapped it in a towel, and placed it inside the freezer beside that second government letter. I didn't know if cold could mute microphones, but superstition was the only faith I had left. My phone vibrated. A call from my editor at the Ledger, the independent research outlet I sometimes freelanced for. "Hey, ghost girl," he said. "You disappeared. You okay?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just needed quiet." "Quiet's overrated. Listen, if you want distraction, I've got a weird one. A defense contractor whose employees keep resigning into thin air. Literally resign, no forwarding address, vanish. You'd love it." I stared at the condensation on my freezer door, my heartbeat syncing with the pulse light from the smoke detector. "What's the company's name?" "Solaris Dynamics." Ring a bell. Helios, Solaris. The same mythology, the same hunger for light. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. The coincidence wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. That night, I played Ethan's recording again, this time through headphones, volume low. His voice filled my skull, but I caught something new: background noise. An air unit, maybe, and under it a rhythm like footsteps pacing on concrete. At minute 8, he hesitated mid-sentence and whispered something, barely audible. I boosted the audio with free software, isolating frequencies until the word emerged, breathy and scared. "Mesa, Mesa." I googled it alongside Helios. Nothing. But White Mesa, Utah brought up an abandoned airfield leased for research storage. No coordinates, just an address that felt deliberately imprecise, like a shadow giving directions to itself. That was when my phone lit up with a new message. Stop searching. He's not gone, but if you keep going, you will be. No number, no signature. The kind of message you can't trace because it doesn't want to be found, it wants to be obeyed. I turned off my phone, pulled the SIM, and crushed it under my heel. Then I started packing. The drive to Utah took 2.5 days. I told Ethan's mother I needed space, told my job I was chasing a lead, told myself I was only going to look. The desert was a kind of mercy. Flat, silent, indifferent. Grief has a shape in cities. In open land it dissolves into horizon. I reached White Mesa before dawn on the third day. The sky was a bruise fading to light. Through binoculars, the compound looked ordinary. Chain-link fences, warehouses, floodlights, a hangar with a half-torn flag. Ordinary until you noticed the movement. Guards who never talked, trucks that arrived but never left, and the way even the wind seemed to detour around it. I waited until sunset before getting closer. My car was a rental with fake plates. My idea fabrication stitched from old freelance press badges. Ethan would have smiled at my poor encryption. Crawling along the fence line, I saw a convoy of unmarked vans unloading crates into one warehouse. The air buzzed faintly, as if the ground itself were wired. Then, through the glare of floodlights, I saw him. Ethan, thinner, bearded, but unmistakable. He was alive, hauling equipment, flanked by armed men. He looked up once, as if pulled by invisible thread, and for a heartbeat his eyes met mine across the fence. No shock, no smile, just a flicker of warning run. Before I could move, a spotlight swept the field. I dropped heart-punching sand, as voices barked through radios. Footsteps thundered toward the perimeter. I crawled backward until my palms found asphalt, then drove until the sky turned purple with distance. When I finally stopped at a gas station 80 miles away, my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't fit the nozzle. He was alive. He was a prisoner. And the truth was no longer buried, it was breathing. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face framed in floodlight, the same eyes that once traced poetry on my skin now stripped of everything but survival. By morning, exhaustion had sharpened into resolve. If Ethan was alive, someone had rewritten his death, and whoever had done it had rewritten mine by proxy. I checked into a roadside motel under a fake name, the kind that comes from a half-read billboard. Turner. From my duffel I pulled Ethan's laptop. The freezer burn had fogged the casing, but it booted like a reluctant confession. I opened the project underservice signal folder again. Hidden deeper inside was a secondary archive, one I'd missed before because it required a two-step biometric key, fingerprint and voice recognition. Ethan must have known I'd find it. He'd used a phrase I'd said 100 times when debugging his code: truth has a checksum. I whispered it. The system beeped, paused, then opened. Inside was a single document. Helios Directive, Field Protocol 17. The language was clinical, bloodless. But between the jargon, a horror unfolded. Subjects designated as data ghosts are to be reintegrated post-deletion for live behavioral calibration under supervised isolation. Reintegration success is measured by compliance, cognitive stability, and erasure of civilian identity. They weren't killing people. They were unmaking them, erasing their civilian lives and rewriting them as ghosts who no longer existed. Obedient, programmable, disposable. And Ethan, he was one of them. I drove back to White Mesa. Rage made me reckless. I parked behind a line of freight trucks and followed a supply team through a service gate just before dawn. Their badges were magnetic. Mine was adhesive and trembling. Inside, the air tasted of ozone and antiseptic. The corridors were lit by white strips that hummed like hornets. Every door bore a numeric code and a phrase: containment, calibration, realignment. Through a narrow window I saw rows of people sitting at terminals, silent, typing the same string of data over and over. Their faces were blank. And in the far corner, Ethan. He was thinner still, his hair clipped close, his movements precise like a metronome. I pressed my hand against the glass. He didn't look up. I slipped into the observation bay, heart hammering against the rhythm of machines. A monitor flickered with his biometric data: pulse, eye dilation, neural coherence. A line of text scrolled beneath it: subject A47, Hail shows persistent recall residue, memory decay at 72%, reconditioning scheduled, persistent recall. He remembered me. The door behind me hissed open. A woman in a gray lab coat stepped in, startled but not shocked. You shouldn't be here. Her badge read Dr. M. Keller. I grabbed her wrist. You're turning people into ghosts. You're erasing lives. She didn't struggle. Erasure isn't death, she said softly. It's mercy. Some truths destroy nations, and some lies destroy souls. Her gaze faltered. He volunteered. The words hit harder than any blow. No, I said. He loved me. He wouldn't. He did, she interrupted. To protect you. Keller lifted her wrist, pressing a code into the wall console. The glass partition dimmed. 15 minutes, she whispered. After that, they'll know. Then she left. The door to the calibration chamber unlocked with a pneumatic sigh. Ethan turned as I stepped in. For a second, his face flickered. Recognition, disbelief, fear. Maya. The sound of my name broke me. I ran to him, but he stepped back. You shouldn't have come. You're alive. My hands trembled as I reached for him. They said you were dead, he finished, voice flat. It's simpler that way. No, I caught his sleeve. I found your file. I heard your recording. You were trying to expose them. He flinched. You listened to that? I had to. His jaw tightened. Then you know they're watching everything. Even now. I looked up at the camera's small black eyes dotting the ceiling. Then let them watch. Maya, please. His voice cracked. If you pull me out, they'll erase you too. Then they'll have to find me first. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to his breathing and mine, two frequencies almost syncing. Then somewhere above us, an alarm screamed. Go, he shouted. Now. I'm not leaving without you. He turned, slammed his fist into the console, and the emergency shutters began to close. Maya, he yelled over the wail. You can't save me. I lunged through the narrowing gap and caught his hand. For an instant, our fingers locked, the metal of his ring cutting into my palm. Then the door sealed between us. Through the glass, he mouthed something I couldn't hear. 3 words. Then the gas filled the room. He sank to his knees, eyes still on mine until the fog swallowed him whole. I ran. Corridors blurred, sirens chased me like ghosts. I burst into the night, lungs on fire, desert air sharp as glass. Behind me, white mesa glowed like a dying sun. When I reached the car, I looked down and saw his ring still pressed into my palm, a perfect circle of blood. I drove until the lights vanished in the mirror. At a diner 50 miles away, I collapsed into a booth and opened my laptop. I uploaded everything. Helios Directive, the recordings, Keller's voice clipped from the security feed, to every whistleblower network I knew. Then I hit send and watched progress bars crawl toward truth. The last message from the anonymous number appeared on my screen. You've made a choice. Now live with it. I typed back, hand steady. I already am. 3 months later, the desert bloomed. I saw it from a train window, miles of ochre earth pricked with wild poppies, red as the warnings I'd ignored. Spring had come to the place where I almost died. Maybe that was forgiveness, maybe just physics. The world had changed quietly. The Helios leaks exploded across encrypted forums, then trickled into the mainstream like poison diluted in water. For weeks, anchors mouthed words they didn't understand: behavioral neutralization, civilian erasure, data ghosts. Congress demanded hearings. The agencies denied involvement. 2 names, mine and Ethan Hale's, appeared in a footnote of a report no one finished reading. But the footage couldn't be buried. The clip of him inside that glass room, saying my name before the gas consumed him. It played once on a whistleblower channel before disappearing. That was enough. The world didn't need to see him die again. I did. I moved to the coast after that, changed my last name, traded encryption software for seashells. There's something healing about things that survive waves without remembering the storms that made them smooth. My apartment sits above a bookstore. The owner leaves the door unlocked for me after closing because he thinks I'm harmless. He doesn't know that some nights I sit behind the counter, scrolling through archive data dumps of the Helios program, looking for one proof that Ethan made it out, that the gas was a decoy, that somewhere a new identity woke up carrying fragments of our life like sand in his pockets. I never find it, but once, a message arrived from an unlisted server. Subject line, checksum. Inside, the sun sets where it began. Mesa Westgate, June 21st. I didn't go. Maybe it was bait. Maybe it was him. Sometimes courage is running toward the truth. Sometimes it's staying still when the truth calls your name. I kept his ring. Not on a chain anymore, but on my finger, the cut in my palm long healed. When I twist it, I remember the moment between alarms and gas, when everything in me screamed to fight, but love told me to listen. I remember what he mouthed before he vanished. Don't forget me. And I haven't. I won't. One evening, walking home from the shore, I passed a man repairing a streetlight. The glow caught his jaw just so familiar and possible. Our eyes met. He smiled, small and private, and for a heartbeat the world rewound to the sound of a smartwatch pinging at 2:14 a.m. Then he turned away, and the light flickered back to life. Truth doesn't always save you. Sometimes it just frees you enough to live with the pain that stays. I mailed Keller's confession to every reporter still willing to touch the story. I never signed my name. She disappeared a month later. The facility was decommissioned, or maybe just renamed. People still vanish. Governments still lie. But somewhere, someone remembers a woman who refused to forget. That's enough. I sit by the window now, ocean breathing against glass, and whisper into the dark. They told me to lie. I told the truth, and the truth finally told me back. If silence is safety, then let my voice be dangerous.